This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Hayden Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Hayden's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
It's the consultant and the millennial. This is about how to grow your business, market, manage, and not kill your coworkers along the way. And actually, this episode is about how to not kill yourself along the way. That's where we're going to go here. Work-life balance. Hayden Shaw joins me. He's helped over 30,000 managers and is works with a lot of high-profile companies that you've heard of. My name is Seth Tower Hurd. I run a company called Digital Profit Farm. We make your website and social media make money. We got that stuff out of the way. All right, well, I'm bad at this, so I hope you're good. You're better at this than I am, because otherwise it's going to be a real short episode called, well, I've been screwing that up.
As long as, well, why don't I go shut the door, because we're recording this, from our own individual locations as opposed to sitting together.
Yeah.
Let me close the door so my wife can't hear it. And if my wife doesn't hear what I say, then I will sound far smarter than if she can call out and go, oh, no, you suck at that, too. Yeah.
Okay.
See?
You go ahead and you close the door. I love these impromptu moments. If you don't actually watch the video, I suppose if you listen to the audio, you already know this, but Hayden will, occasionally when we're together, he'll actually leave and go get a prop, like a T-shirt that says something funny on it. Having him shut the door is a very brief aside. Okay. By the way, I actually met somebody last night that really loved the networking for people who hate networking, which was our last episode. So I got to be the expert, and now I am definitely back in the learner's chair. So you just got back from Switzerland. So obviously you have a travel schedule that's certainly more hectic than mine, although I'm probably putting more hours at this point than you are into my business.
But
you've done this for a lot of years. You've worked with some really high profile leaders. You haven't, you're not divorced. Your kids don't hate you. You're not a meth addict. Like you're pretty good. You're pretty good, right? So let's get into it, man. What do we do here?
Work-life balance really has, that's kind of the category. So, having worked with Franklin Covey for all these years and time management be a big thing. Work-life balance has been a topic that I've talked about better than I've done. So just to be fair with that. So here's the history of work-life balance for the last 25 years in 2 minutes. Started with baby boomers. One of the reasons why Stephen Covey blew it out of the water with 7 Habits is baby boomers were like, I work all the time. This isn't what I intended when I was at Woodstock. What's gone wrong? And it really began to give them some categories to manage work-life balance. Then it moved over to, Fast Company magazine saying there's no such thing as work-life balance when you've got people in Bangalore who will do your job for $27,000 a year and be grateful for it. And then, then suddenly it was, we don't do work-life balance. We do work-life integration. And the last request I've had on this topic that was more sophisticated was, we don't do work-life integration anymore. We just do presence in the moment. Be present in whatever moment you're in. So in many ways, you see this shift. Now, partly this is generational, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But so partly it's generational in the way the different generations handle the idea of work-life balance. But that's the migration that it's gone through. In many ways, we've thrown up our hands and said it's impossible to have work-life balance if you're an active professional. And this is not just generational. This is also, and I really liked your review for Relevant of the new Roseanne show. I haven't watched it yet, but jet lag means you go to bed before the show comes on. But anyway. But that whole idea, so it's also this is also class oriented. And as I've done all this generational sociological research, work-life balance is in many ways a professional topic, not a lower middle class blue collar topic. And it's certainly not it's certainly not a working poor topic. And so that's what's interesting about work-life balance is in many ways, work-life balance is a topic of privilege. And in addition to that, we actually work 10 fewer hours than we did at the turn of the century.
So we already have work-life balance right off the bat.
But you just don't know. You don't know because life after World War II in this magical boomer childhood where Tinkerbell threw pixie dust every Sunday night on Disney and said it was a wonderful world. that time was wonderful because it was the time of the job. And, Fortune magazine heralded in 1996 in a cover story, the end of the job, with that classic picture of that huge bare-shirted man turning that huge bolt, that's been kind of the classic industrial age picture. They had that and said the end of the job. The job made classical work-life balance possible. And so in many ways, we need to shed that idea and then kind of explore what that means in its different forms for different generations, for different places, places people are in life. And then I think actually we talk about what are some practical ways to deal with it, both hacks and some life choices that a person has to make. Because time is what couples fight over more than money now. That's the irony of it. Couples used to fight over money. They used to fight over sex. They used to fight over kids and in-laws in that order. Time is the new fight especially with dual income couples.
Okay. So I'll just go through my last 3 months because
I should probably quit. I should probably quit put my coffee cup down so hard here on my standing desk, because every time I do, I just notice my picture goes crazy. So if you see me shaking, it's because I'm technologically incompetent.
Okay. So I kind of got into a tailspin where I just really hit it hard for January, February, and March, and thought, well, I need to cut back on the virtual admin hours I use and do more stuff because, I've had a fairly major client the clients that kind of cut like half their staff and was in not a very good spot, right? So that was a hit to the income. So, the way you get out of that is to sell your way out of that. And the way that you get out and the way you sell your way out of something is to focus on sales. Instead, I took over a lot of the piddly crap that I'm bad at in the business. And, and also my wife and I are having our first kid, and she was pretty
Congratulations.
sick. Yes.
I don't think you've announced that online yet.
I don't think so. So I think we're going to hold this till Thursday or Friday after we record because, we haven't said it on social media yet. So hopefully I'm smart enough to put this out on social media after that. But, so Amanda, who's a pretty killer professional and really good at a lot of stuff, was just thrown up every day. I mean, almost every day. So, that also means I took over the laundry and the grocery shopping. And not that I didn't do a good chunk of that stuff already, but basically, I mean, when somebody's that sick and there was nothing wrong other than she's just pregnant, and sometimes it happens like that, then, they just don't have a lot of energy for a lot of other stuff. So I took over pretty much 100% of domestic duties, which we'd formerly shared. I brought more stuff in-house than I had any business doing. And then I just kind of, somewhere along the lines there, I didn't sell. And I probably didn't take a day off for 3 months. And then when I took a day off, I realized how insane that was. And that was Sunday. This is Friday. I'm pretty, like, the energy level is pretty far depleted again. I had a very wise high school basketball coach. My senior year, we wound up being nationally ranked, and I got to play for a year in college before I blew my knee out. And also, I wasn't that good before I blew my knee out. Just in case you think I was talking of the glory days, I was a very kind of average player when I got to college, to low average. However, my high school coach said, if you're a little tired, take yourself out of the game, sit down for 2 minutes. That's going to be better than if I have to take you out and you have to sit down for 6 or 7 minutes because you're exhausted. And somewhere along the lines, I quit taking those 2-minute breaks. And those are really, really hard for me anyway, because I grew up on a farm and I have this unrealistic standard. I grew up on a farm and I grew up with a bunch of refugees who were also farmers. And that'll really make you think you could work hard.
That's true. I guess I'd never put those two things together.
Yeah.
That will definitely skew your perspective on how much work a person should be able to do before they can sit down.
Yes. And so, I thought I was just holding myself to the standards of the people I grew up with. And my mom finally said to me, she's like, well, you realize all these people that work so hard that you kind of idolize, the greatest generation, all the World War II vets. She's like, you realize that they did work really hard sometimes, but it was raining. They didn't do anything all day. They just got a day off. She's like, you never have that. And so I took a day off. I realized how much you need to change things up. I've done a pretty good job of changing things up. And then I'm at Friday now, and on the work-life balance spectrum, I would say I probably worked 12 to 14 hours the last 3 days in a row. And then, I've just had several interactions with people who frustrate me, which to me is actually harder than work. we just did our last episode on networking. I love a lot of people. The people I don't love are a lot harder for me to deal with because I tend to just literally tell people I don't like them. And when I'm in a situation where I can't do that, it's very difficult. So we got a little bit on the professional side, a little bit on the personal side.
Because it all ties together. Work-life balance is one of those things that could be 5 episodes because everything gets sucked up into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I've got...
Because you just covered energy. That's something I didn't even bring up.
Yeah.
One of the things about work-life balance that's changed over the last 15 years, and probably the biggest innovation in time management, is the focus on energy management and not minute management or hour management. And so what you just said there was, I can do a 14-hour day with people I like, doing things I like, and not flinch, not be as tired as an 8-hour day when I deal with people I find frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I've got in the next week, we'll say, just to keep it a little generic, I've got a personal situation and a professional situation where it's just people I don't want to deal with. And I haven't done a good enough job at kind of staying in the present to where that's not kind of the future's not sucking energy out of the present as well. And it's not because I wouldn't just tell people, yeah, heck with you. It's because there's a rare situation in life where I legitimately can't do that. And I'm up against a couple of those, because I think one of the things that's the best decisions I've ever made for the company that I run is I'm going to protect my people from the ways that people have treated me horribly in the past. So if you think that we're going to respond to you at 7:30 in the morning on a weekend when you haven't given us any heads up, and you're not even texting and saying it's an emergency, it's a one-time thing, it's just that's your expectation, then we can't work together. I care about my graphic designers too much. I care about my coders too much. I care about my project manager too much. We can't do that. And so I'm a pretty quick person to cut people off, but sometimes you can't cut somebody off and you just got to deal with it. And that exhausts me. That's harder than work.
No doubt about it. So work-life balance, let's start with what do you do with it? Well, part of what's made work-life balance generational is that younger generations are on and expect to be on a lot more. Boomers, because it was not digital. I know. Seth and I have the same virtual admin, and because Seth is younger, she doesn't do as much ageist trash talking as she does with me. So, because I went back to paper. I can't find it, but because I went back to paper for some of my tracking of stuff and to-do lists, like a whole lot of the world has. She's like, paper? I didn't even know what that is. I don't think I've ever used paper. I can't think of anything I do on paper. I'm like, oh, shut up. This was our conversation yesterday.
I don't own a checkbook, man.
Right. And so because things are digital, that changes work-life integration. So I saw that last week. I should have not taken my digital watch to Switzerland. I wanted it for temperature. It's easy to see the temperature. I know, because reaching into your pocket for your phone is so hard. But I'm now used to having this digital watch. But the problem with the digital watch is, in order to check for something you wanted to know, you also have to see all the notifications. So the boomers, and I know people like like Christine, the admin, has no idea, by the way, that, she's like, I didn't even know what that world was like. I know, shut up. But in a land long, long ago, far, far away, you either had memos or you had mail and you had phone calls. And when your inbox was done, you were done. If you wanted to go check stuff, you went and got a newspaper. And so it was easier to have categories or buckets. And that's one of the biggest things for baby boomers is, baby boomers see work-life balance in many ways still as, am I done? And the idea of never being done is what's overwhelming. Whereas, I won't name the company, but I was in a company and some of the extras were like, hey, I run projects for marketing, and the millennials, they'll be like, okay, I'm done. No, you're not done because you don't have me all your stuff. And if you don't get me all your stuff, I'm going to have to work this weekend to put the PowerPoint together that I have to present as the project manager on Tuesday. You're not done until all your stuff's in. Whereas, in many ways, millennials, Xers, assume the world is never going to end. And therefore, it's like, okay, I've put in my hours, or I've done my time, or I just have to draw a boundary somewhere. And so here's where I'm going to draw the boundary. And that creates a lot of tension at work with older generations. They're like, whoa, your boundary can't be here because I need it here because I'm going to have to clean up after you. That becomes a critical test of work-life balance. Boomers are like, I'm still looking for the magical time when all the memos are done, the desk is cleaned out, my inbox is what we used to call it. Go look it up online, those of you who are under 40. Go look what an inbox is up on Google. Anyway, my inbox is empty. I've caught up. Whereas for Xers, it's what are the critical deadlines we got to hit? You're not done until that's ready. And for many millennials, it's like, no, I'm not the one who stands up. That's what I told the Xers. Like, I don't get this. I said, you're standing up in front of the VPs. They're not. Why don't you involve them in it actually hurting a bit if it doesn't look good or it's not done? Why don't you put their names to their part of the presentation? They're like, oh, that would work. Yeah, you sign your part of the presentation so the VP see the quality of your work. I won't patch it for you, but we'll just be transparent as to who did what. Well, that made complete sense. And so for millennials, I'm not knocking them. What they're saying is, I need to draw a line so I can balance my life. One last piece of this, what I say my presentations are the older two generations, traditionalists and boomers, they thought that work was the steak and everything else was a vegetable or dessert. Whereas Xers and millennials are much more, hey, life is a waffle and you're getting your work syrup on my personal life waffle squares for the last 2 weeks, so can I have half a Friday off? And that's something that throws the different generations off as well. And so work-life balance has a lot to do with where we figure out where to put the boundaries in a digital world. All right, I'm off that little tear now.
Okay. No, I think that's really fantastic. I was thinking through what I am there because you've often said I'm half millennial, half World War II generation. Where it's true. Like, pick up your shovel and dig, shut up, I don't care.
No, it's pick up your shovel and dig, and while you're digging, also, post things to Facebook and manage social media and do that. So you have both generations and a double dose of workaholic from both.
So, I've got an article due for Relevant, which is actually going to come out before this episode drops. But realizing that I can't do this, fortunately, marriage-wise, Amanda and I are really solid. And, I usually don't neglect, the marriage part of my life. But where I do probably neglect it more, I've noticed, is the last couple years that I've been really, really focused on starting a company is friends, and then just like myself. And there's nothing I hate more than the term self-care, because the people who post about it are the laziest pieces of human garbage and don't actually need it. They're like, I just need self-care. No, you don't. You don't even work full time. Stop. You're going to die. Try to do something with your insignificant, stupid life before you die. Would you go do that? And then when you're tired from creating something in the world, then you can do self-care. But by the time you've done that, you'll be mature enough to realize you don't need to stupid post about it. And I'm a huge social media person, but I'm sick of your lazy crap, and then you feeling like you need to recover.
All right. Yeah, that is the part of this. Is the part of this rant that I can probably agree with.
Maybe this is the. Go ahead.
Is the posting about it. Really, I don't, the fact that you went to Taco Bell, that's great. I don't know that we all need to see pictures of that. And self-care is kind of the same thing. It's kind of like, hey, you want to see what I ate? Yeah. So I get that. It is a bit self-indulgent. I'll give you that.
Yeah. Well, I do get that coming up on having our first kid, I realized that we only have so much time. We got exactly 6 months before we have this other human that is going to need a lot of attention. And so, I want to make sure we get out and do something, go on some kind of vacation, do something like that, because I realize how valuable that time is, right? And I probably do tend to fall into the category of I will cut my own stuff first before everybody else. So, I'll cut working out, I'll cut anything I enjoy, and, I'll just handle my business. And my business could be, taking care of Amanda, taking care of my extended family, being there for people. for somebody who's not easily persuaded or pushed around, like I value loyalty and favors so much, I can name 3 people I've helped move I genuinely do not like. Like, not just they're an acquaintance, I actively dislike them.
Well, hey, if you hear this podcast and Seth has helped you move, we should have a little contest, a little pool on, does Seth like you?
Well, I just mean that, like, and maybe this episode's getting too personal, but you probably have that thing that's a virtue.
No, I just think you're burning. I think you're burning stuff as we go. That's all.
Okay,
I don't think it's too personal.
So you probably have that thing that's a virtue that winds up being a vice. I do think that's a legitimate thing to say, right?
Well, okay, so work-life balance is at its essence, regardless of the generation. And, as we talked about class a bit ago, if you're a working poor, you're going to need 3 jobs. And so the research on working poor is that, there are some that don't work. And my good Republican friends, and I lean that way. My good Republican friends would be like, "Oh, the poor is sponging," but the working poor, quite a bit of research on them. You really have to do 3 minimum wage jobs to have 2 kids and to just pay some bills. And so for them, work-life balance doesn't even exist. And anybody who's ever had a parent that did 3 jobs. Full-time job, part-time job. My son earned some money around Christmas time working at Target. And he's like, "Dad, these are people who are coming in at 4, working until 8, then going to their full-time job. They sleep 6 hours a night, and that's all they do." And so that's not an uncommon life for some people. So work-life balance doesn't even exist there. And there's a whole section of society that does kind of a blue-collar thing where it's like, look, I do my hours. I still have a job. I do my hours. I make enough money to pay the bills. I don't live high, but I do my job. I work hours. I work a job, and then I go home and don't have to think about my job. What's changed dramatically is the percentage of people who have to think about their job when they're off their job because they don't have a job. They have a series of responsibilities or a series of projects. That's the single biggest shift in work-life balance. Is in the past, when you had a job, you would finish your job and somebody else would take over your job. So if you work in a factory, you make steel like my father-in-law did. The next general turn foreman comes in and he's responsible for the steel for the next 8 hours.
Yes.
You go home. You may get called if there's a problem or a question. You answer that. The person who is responsible for it takes that information and deals with it. You don't have to come in and deal with it because you're not responsible and your shift is over. Whereas you never have a time when you're not responsible. I never have a time when I'm not responsible. Sociologists call that high demand jobs. High demand jobs means the job can ask you to change your plans. It can ask you to take time away on a weekend or an evening. It can ask you to break out of a job, a shift, and into being responsible either emotionally or mentally all the time. High demand jobs tend to pay better.
Yeah.
But they also take a call. I mean, they also demand something all the time.
Yeah. And obviously, like I'm not a victim here. Like I picked this life. I'm definitely, like I would say overall, if you measure the happiness over the last year of me being out on my own versus me working for somebody else, I believe that I'm ultimately better off once I kind of make some adjustments. I believe that other people are better off. I think I think it's okay to say I'm a pretty good employer. Like I treat my team really well. And I aspire to make money in a good part because I want to give a good chunk of it away, which makes the world better and just totally screws over Bernie Sanders people that I would be, like not a selfish piece of human garbage. Okay, so that's the macro. On the micro, what I think is interesting about what you said is I had this mentality where I have this sort of working poor attitude that's what you're supposed to do. Kind of mixed with the stress of a high demand job. Because everybody I knew growing up, I'm from the second poorest county in the state. Everybody worked like that. People had 3 jobs. I looked at people who were probably lower middle class in some ways and thought, man, like they were really affluent and like, in some ways they were probably living like too high on the hog, or they just showed off their wealth too much. And it wasn't that they did necessarily. It's that everybody I knew was broke. And so I brought that, like, you're not an adult unless you work this much. But the people who are working like that also didn't have the mental probably responsibilities that I do. Would you say that that's true? And then what do we do about the high demand job thing? How do you get normal again?
Yeah, well, we've got to figure out where the boundaries are within a never-ending stream of things. And so work-life integration is where work-life balance came to, as I did the quick history, because work-life balance was, you got to quit overworking, baby boomers. You got to know when to stop. Well, okay, because boomers got ahead by putting in more hours. That makes sense. Traditionalists measured things based on how hard you worked. If you worked harder, you were worth more. So you competed against all those other baby boomers by working more. Xers come along, they're less competitive, there are fewer of them. Xers competed with baby boomers rather than with each other. So they didn't have to put in as many hours in order to be competitive. They just had to put in as many hours as the job required. And that meant integration. I may have to work on a Saturday morning because the project that I'm responsible for couldn't get the data it needed from somebody else until late Friday, but the presentation is still due Monday afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to work part of Saturday to do it. And work-life integration, which means I'm then going to take some time off on Friday and go see my kid's soccer game. And so work-life integration, I'm going to have to work sometimes in hours that didn't used to be work hours. So that was integration. Now, in a lot of jobs, it's, you know what, part of the time I'm actually working is on weekends, and I'm still responsible for what goes on during the work week, which means I'm still going to get emails and people still expect me to check. For example, I get back from Switzerland. One of the large accounting firms, somebody took off yesterday and today. But when they saw my out of office, they said, tell you what, let's just do a call at 6 o'clock on Saturday when Hayden's driving home. On Thursday when Hayden's driving home, because I'd rather do that and know we had everything taken care of than try to squeeze it in next week and have to race. So in other words, they came out of their day off to do a work call for a half hour because it was better for the responsibilities they had than it would have been to schedule it in work hours or outside of their time. Many people do that. They'll take 2 days off and still work 2 hours of those because it's during the work week and they still have to make things happen. So that is being present in the moment. Is I just assume that I'm going to have fluid hours where there's never a day I take off or can think I don't have to look. And, those don't happen very often. And so, first, I think that's probably true. And second, I think that's delusional.
Okay. Wait, what's delusional? Oh, that it's delusional that you can come out for a couple hours and then relax again, or what?
That's the problem, is there is a load, an electrical load that never shuts off. So, my father-in-law was an electrician. He would turn off his VCR and then have to program it again. It's like, quit doing that, leave that one thing on. But he knew there was a load, and he knew that there was the potential for a problem with electrical equipment because there was always a load when it was on. That's what happens to us. We all know the difference between completely relaxing when we don't feel responsible for something and there always being a load where we're looking. Let me just check. I'm only going to check 3 times a day, but let me just check my email and see if there's anything I need to stop and handle.
Okay.
And that's a load. And, in the Soviet Union, they tried a number of different configurations. They had people work 5 days a week. They had people work 7 days a week. They discovered that people do best when they take 1 day off and work 6 days a week. Don't tell your employer that. But they found that they did best. And, Hebrews, Jewish wisdom, Jewish scriptures are take a Sabbath, take a day when you don't do anything, when you are off, not because the work has stopped. And, in farming, you don't ever have to stop. And you can imagine these Jewish farmers looking across the border at their non-Jewish neighbors who are working on a Saturday going, oh, I could get so far ahead if I could just clear some land today. But you didn't work because the work was gone. You worked because that was your day not to work. It's part of the way you honored God, but there was a natural energy replenishment that came from that. So I think we all need to figure out when we're going to shut off and say, hell or high water, I'm not responsible. It may be a half a day. It may be a full day. But when is your blackout day? That's the thing Mrs. Shaw would go, oh, yeah, and you don't do that every week. And no, I don't. But that is, I think that's critical advice to say, in an always-on world, when are you going to shut off and there's no load? because we don't realize when you're working for 3 months without a day off, you didn't realize how tired you were, because we get into a zone where we just ignore the fatigue. And as soon as you take a day off, you're like, oh, I'm crap.
Yeah.
I had no idea I was that tired.
Yeah. Well, and, one of the things that I may do in 2018 actually is, look at kind of a business partner relationship. Like, you and I've talked about outside the podcast. And maybe one reason to do that is because there's also another person that's like, can kind of take the temperature on everything. And that I think I'm doing something good because, like, seriously, when I was in that mode, I was measuring my all day, every day in 15-minute increments. I really was. And I thought if I missed a 15-minute, goal, there was like dire consequences, right? Like if I was a little slow writing an email because I was so tired, I was really hard on myself. I am a person, like, one thing about going out on my own, I didn't get a better boss out of the deal. Not yet, because as good as I am to the people who work for me, and I think they'd say the same thing, I'm just really hard on myself, and that's something I'm trying to be more mindful of. But you probably need to beware if you are in a situation where your boss sees you as a Clydesdale that's supposed to pull the wagon as far as possible, and when you die, he's just going to get another Clydesdale, he or she. And if you work for yourself, you can treat yourself like that as well. So, part of this may be realizing that if you're like me and you have a tendency towards that, you need to have people around you that kind of go, okay, what's going on? What's going on here? Why are you doing this?
That's the downside of having yourself for a boss. You've now fused two relationships. Your boss, even if your boss is a crazy Clydesdale person, they're still like, oh, you got to feed the Clydesdales. But when you're your own boss, you have the possibility of complete insanity, which is I can only eat in 15-minute increments because I'm losing a whole increment by eating. I will never eat again.
I was down to eating lunch in like 8 minutes because I would try to watch TV a little bit on my lunch break to relax because it's something nice about working for yourself. And I would watch Marvel's The Punisher. It would take me a week to get through an episode because I'd only watch 8 minutes.
Precisely. Whereas if you have a boss, they'd be like, okay, Clydesdale, take a moment. And that, you're right. That's really well said. I actually am not that great of a boss. I didn't find a better boss when I went out on my own. And looking at things in 15-minute increments gets inside our head, and then we can't take a day off. Now, part of that happens when you have a client that goes down and you're like, okay, I'm going to need some money.
Yeah.
Many people find themselves hitting into crazy mode when they're like, oh, wow, we're 30% short of where we need to be, either in the financial plan or in the business plan. It doesn't matter if it's if it's an individual or a corporation. That's when people, to go back to our tagline, that's when people want to kill each other at work, is when they're like, what are we going to do to make up that money? And our first response isn't usually thoughtful. Our first response is usually neurotic.
Yeah.
And you remember, neurosis, paranoid is when you're afraid somebody's out to get you. Neurosis is when you're afraid it comes from all directions and you must. Paranoid people often freeze. Neurotic people frequently go crazy and start fighting in all directions. And so neurotic people make great warriors because they're so used to being anxious all the time and always being in battle mode that when they're in an actual live battle, normal human beings are like, I think I wet myself. Neurotic people are like, just another day at the office. Shoot stuff at me. I'm used to that. And so we all tend to move into neurosis when we feel a threat. And so if it's a floating threat, we try to battle on all sides rather than thoughtfully say, where's my biggest bet? We bet on everything and we expend energy we don't have to succeed at that. I think you just did a normal reaction all of us do when we're under threat. When you have a baby, you and Amanda will do the exact same thing because it'll throw your whole rhythm off and you'll have to find a new rhythm, which is, okay, how do we now build a marriage for three? rather than just for the two of us. And so every time we hit into a new situation or a time when we're like, wow, I'm short on something. When we have a kid, we're short on hours and sleep. When you lose a big customer, we're short on revenue. And so we always respond with a bit of neurosis. That's just a human reaction.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's what kills you. So if I can go into most of human history, those stress hormones actually did you a favor because, you are a Gaul living in Spain and Rome is invading. And the more people's heads you split open with an axe, the more likely your family is to, not be annihilated. Right.
You fight until the fighting's over.
Yeah. And so those hormones are all about gross motor skills and shutting down your higher thought processes and chopping people's heads open with axes. The problem with the modern world is that a lot of times that traffic or a bad email or something like that triggers the same thing. And you got to be able to get out of that. Like I'm kind of preaching to myself here. You got to be able to get out of that because otherwise you actually do the opposite of what it is that you need to do. So, to use the kind of a worn out example, if you panic while you're in a small plane and you pull up on the stick because you're trying to get it to go higher because you're going to crash, you're going to die. You actually have to go into a nosedive to get the speed back and then swoop up, right? Which requires higher thought processes. So the same thing happens in your professional life.
Or some training.
Yeah.
You have to train out of that so that you know to do, so that you have neural pathways that will go against your survival instincts.
Yes. Yeah.
And let me take a moment here. I think that's one of the reasons why taking a day off or a section of time off, where we say what my mentor taught me. He said, "Look, I had a precursor to a heart attack at 54 because I never slowed down. That's what I thought I had to do. When you get a precursor to a stroke, and it affected him. He had, I forget what it's called, where when it's cold outside, it feels like his arm's on fire. So he finally moved to Florida. Yeah, and he goes, that's what happens with a precursor to a stroke. It says, why don't you rethink your life? Well, we don't have the time. We don't give ourselves enough non-adrenaline space if we don't take a block of time off. And he would say to me, sorry about that, phone's ringing. Anyway, he would say to me, see how distracting that is, digital life? Anyway,
it is.
what would he say to me? Between jet lag and the phone, I have no idea what Al would say to me. He would, he basically say, I never took time off. I never took a break. And you have got to unhook or you'll fry out. And so it'll always be there. It'll never stop. And he said, I would finally say, screw it. They can fire me. That's what he would say. Screw it. They can fire me. And then I'd go home and they would still promote me. I would think I'm an imposter here. I'm over my head. And wow, they would promote me again. And I think, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going home. And then they promote me again. He said, my approach to work-life balance was to go, I can't do it anymore. And I never got fired. I always lived in fear that somehow the horrible things would happen. The attackers would come and take my family, to go back to your idea. One of the things that helps us neurologically break out of that cycle so that we go down rather than up in the plane is that we take time off where we learn we don't die.
Yeah. Well, and I see.
So you're a living example of taking a day off Sunday and going, I'm not dead. And actually, I should get some elevation because I've been flying about 30 feet above the ground now for a while. And it would take that time off. It breaks the adrenaline cycle, gives us a chance to think again. And so if we don't block out time when we're not on, then we can't adjust to the different roles we play in life, and we can't balance our life. We can't not be working. And it makes us do crazy, senseless things. We stay in the emotional state. We don't get into the logical state like you described so well.
And one of the things, I hope people made it this far in the episode, because I feel like I ranted so much in the beginning, and they're like, what's wrong with you? I'm leaving. So if you made it this far, I will say, and I hope you get to see a few people like this in action, but a few of the people I've been working with recently, have... one guy was at one of the largest consulting companies in the world at a very high leadership level, left and did some work in the startup space, and now is in kind of the cryptocurrency space, which is a lot of fun. And I see him, and I see somebody who's not frantic, and I think of somebody else that I'm friends with, that I'm working on a creative project with, that owns 5 businesses, that makes millions and millions of dollars a year, that has, a bunch of actual celebrity friends, that's crushing it on every level. And he takes a lot of time to do fun stuff. And he also he's got the money. He's not flashy. You wouldn't know he's a multimillionaire if you met him. But he takes the time to do what he enjoys, which means he's not driving he's not driving like a Lamborghini around, but he drops money on restaurants when he wants to enjoy a good meal. He gets out of town for the weekend because if he wants to go to the Bahamas, he can. He doesn't post it on social media or anything. But the point is that
really he could put it under the topic of self-care. I'm taking a last minute trip to the Bahamas because I need self-care.
Nobody who actually needs self-care nobody who posts self-care needs self-care, right? But I look at that and I think, well, if I just work 3 more years like this, I'll have that. And that's probably not true with the story you just told about your boss. That if I work 3 more years like this, I'll probably just be more miserable. That's probably the outcome. And if I want to work the right way, I'll get there. Is that a decent summary for
yes. And part of the interesting thing about you being a traditionalist and a millennial is you got the digital never ending of millennial. And you've got this, if I take care of the farm will take care of me. The more I do for the farm, the more it will produce. There'll be good years, there'll be bad years, that's farming. But if I'll just go take care of the drainage in this one field, then we'll have another half an acre to produce. And if I do that enough times, we'll actually have 10 more acres of land that's productive, and that'll help pay off college for my kids. And so, it's certainly not easy. Like the highlands, it's a whole lot more work to create drainage for 10 more acres over the next 5 years. There's a lot of days of digging, so get digging. You're burning daylight. But that idea, if you take care of the farm will take care of you, and this will lead to that. That's the interesting thing about capitalism and the interesting thing about the new world we're in. A lot of times you do this, it leads to that. But I think that's what the whole 1%ers were all about. And the protest is they're saying, I did all the things you told me to do, and it didn't lead to this. And I think a part of the whole articles in the Great Depression about the end of the American dream or whatever happened in the American dream is that a whole lot of people are realizing you do this, and it's not like the farm. You don't automatically get that. And so why did I do all of that when it didn't actually pay off? And I really need to work hard and enjoy my life, and then work hard and enjoy my life, because my parents worked really hard thinking that if you just put off, you'll get the big candy later. And I think that's what the Xers and the millennials have come along and said, no guarantee. Younger millennials, protesting the 1%ers. I got a bunch of debt and I went to school and I should get that. And yeah, older generations like mine will go, you bunch of babies. You already want to make $100,000 a year, pay off your student loans, and be able to take your trip to the Bahamas. You bunch of babies. You got to work 30 years plugging away for the man before you get that. On the other hand, they're looking at it going, you all told me that if I did this, I'd get this. And Seth, I think that's really the philosophical part we ought to close with is, philosophically speaking, what do you want out of life? If you do all of this and you don't get this, will you be bitter? And a whole lot of people are, if I just sacrifice now, I'll get this. And then they don't get that. And they're like, oh, I would never have done this if I knew I wasn't going to get that. Well, then don't do that. Don't make those sacrifices if you go 5 years into it and still don't have what you want. Don't do that thinking that this has to pay off, because we don't always live in a world where that can happen. Recessions are out of our control. Bitcoin is out of our control. Facebook data is out of our control.
Yeah. Well, and maybe if I can put a bow on this, in a way that maybe doesn't apply to almost anybody, right? But I looked at that 1%er crap, and like few things have ever made me as angry. I've actually stopped and had arguments with protesters alongside the road. Like people like, when you see those construction guys or whatever, union guys protesting a business, I'll stop. I will pull over and I've talked to them and I said, how much money do you make? And they'll tell me. And I say, you make more, and I'll list all the occupations they make more than. Right. And you didn't have to go to college. You didn't really have to get a skill. If you're just a laborer, you're making good money as a laborer. Why are you out here? And I've almost gotten in a couple fist fights. What saved me is I was going to win, and they knew it. So that was good, because if you just listen to the audio, I'm 6'6". But I saw that when people were protesting the 1%, blah 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 blah. The world I came out of is, one of my best friends growing up, that his brother got lost in the shuffle and never got a louse. And lives in a third world country on a few dollars a day. And so why would you ever whine? Right. And mix that with the farming thing, and mix that with the fact that, at one point, and I was 29 or 30 years old, I was laid off. I had 2 master's degrees, and I was roofing, like I've done labor. I needed money. Somebody needed a roof. I could swing a hammer and carry things. The end. However, that's probably a virtue. If I treat myself like that for my whole life, of like, shut up and do your work, it's not going to be the kind of life I probably, had aspired to. So we probably all lean one way or the other, not working hard enough or working too much. And we probably all need kind of conversations like this to at least make us look at it and say,
hey, you know what, man, that is exactly right. It is. Most of us don't do work-life balance well.
Yeah.
Secondly, it comes out of our experiences of life. And thirdly, what this illustrates is you can't do it alone. What I've always said in my time management classes is you can't manage your time alone, because you don't see what you don't see. And the fact is, people who don't work enough don't see that their work-life balance is the other way. You could have more of what you say you want if you quit posting "I need self-care" and actually go roof something, to your illustration. On the other hand, some of us, like yourself, who have got, they didn't make it out alive, so they're living on $3 a day. Shut up and go till something, and also go start a business, you lazy fool. While you work on your masters, people like yourself who are like, there's never too many things you could do to get ahead, probably need somebody else to go, hey, you need to chill or we will have to hose you down.
Okay. I feel like we always have like 3 or 4 endings, or like the bonus edition DVD where you can pick the ending, but I'm going to do the ending again. Or just another thought. You and I both come from a context where we're both pretty rooted in church, although I've done a terrible job of that. When I stopped taking days off, I also stopped basically going to church. Got to work on that and, get back around there. But there's this idea of a small group, which is something that's kind of happened since 2000, where it's like you have a small group of people who kind of are there to be your friend and help you spiritually develop. And that may make no sense to you if you don't come out of the Christian tradition, or, you come out of some sort of faith background where that's just weird. But the times that have been the best in my life, probably professionally, is where I had lunch with the same 5 people every Monday for 5 or 6 years in a row. We were all in the creative space, and we all talked about what we were doing, and there was no real set agenda. We just kind of were there. And I think if you have that, like, maybe I don't think that you can necessarily put all the pressure on your boss or, necessarily even like your spouse to like be that sounding board, because a lot of times the research shows if you put too much pressure on your marriage, your spouse just winds up miserable. Be like, can you not find somebody else to talk to about your work crap? Right. Can I not just be the person who's married to you, not your business partner? And so that's probably, and I don't know that I'm going to fix that this week, but when I have been the healthiest, pick 5 people who do what you do.
Dude, I think you got it. I mean, yeah. I think that's great. Pick 5 people. I interrupted.
Yeah. And get lunch, get breakfast, get coffee, play pool one night a week, whatever it is you got to do, go get that thing. And that's pretty much it.
Good stuff. I think you looked back and said, when have I been at my best? And that was a key piece of it. I think that helped anybody.
By the way, Hayden has to do this kind of crap in my personal life all the time because I get stuck on a work or a personal problem, and he has to listen to me rant until I eventually figure it out. Hey, you need to get your people and process problems worked out, you can find out more about what Hayden does at peopledrivenresults.com. You can go there and find out how to cut your generational turnover in half. And you can check out what I'm doing, which is I help companies make more money with their websites and social media. And I can also help you launch a podcast and get to 10,000 downloads and views within 3 months if you're willing to put a little bit of cash into advertising. And you can find out more about what I do at digitalprofitfarm.com. Check us out. We'd love to help you out. We will see you back here next week.